Today we are looking at a case from the mid-19th century, so sit back as we go to the USA. Berengera Caswell was born on the 17th of February 1828 in the small town of Brompton, near the city of Sherbrooke, in the province of Quebec in Canada. She was one of 6 children, born to Stephen and Tabitha Caswell, a hard-working couple who had migrated to Quebec from New Hampshire. In the first half of the 19th century, opportunities for women in Canada were largely limited by social norms and cultural expectations. Formal education was not compulsory, and very few women pursued academic or professional endeavours. Many young girls would work in domestic service, and after marriage, took on the responsibilities of running the home or looking after the children. However, new industries had emerged in the United States, offering much improved employment opportunities. So like many young Canadian women in the mid-19th century, Berengera Caswell, accompanied by her 2 sisters, Ruth and Thais, boldly ventured across the border to the textile factories in search of the promise of better wages and newfound independence. Within these factories, they were able to undertake tasks like spinning and weaving, while the men were assigned to heavier duties, such as operating machinery and maintenance. They were given accommodation in one of the factory-owned boarding houses, which were overseen by vigilant matrons, whose primary duty was to shield the young female workers from harm by a strict regime of rules and curfews. The sisters worked hard, and like other young women employed in the textile mills, confronted the challenges of factory life with unwavering resilience, despite the long hours and often hazardous working conditions. They first settled in the town of Lowell in Massachusetts. Here Ruth met a young man who she later married, and when their sister was settled, Berengera and Thais decided to go to Manchester in New Hampshire. They had heard that there was much work in Manchester and the prospect of higher wages. Shortly after their arrival, they secured employment at the Amaskig mill. Initially, things went well for them, and Berengera met Mr. William Long, a skilled factory machinist. They soon began courting, and it was clear that they were very fond of each other. However, their relationship faced a sudden upheaval in September 1849, when factory profits declined due to the economic downturn and the increased competition from mills in other regions. As a result, William lost his job, so with few options available, he decided to return to his parents' home in Biddeford, in York County in Maine. Soon after, Berengera also left the mill and found employment in Salem, a small city best known for its witch trials that took place in 1692. However, in November of 1849, she realised that she was with child. Now very worried, and with a profound sense of shame, she considered the daunting reality of her situation. Aware of the severe social stigma attached to unmarried motherhood, she faced a precarious dilemma. She could reveal her condition to her masters, but risk dismissal, as many employers viewed pregnant unmarried women as a moral liability that could tarnish their reputation. However, if they did show her sympathy and let her continue with her work, at least for the next few months, she would have to endure the harsh scrutiny and judgment from her fellow workers. For the first time in her life, she felt isolated and vulnerable in a society that offered little support or understanding for young women in her predicament. She knew that she would have to speak to William, so hoping that he would do the honourable thing and marry her, she travelled to Biddeford, a journey of 80 miles. When she arrived and told him about her situation, William was taken aback. He was just 21 years old and had no immediate plans for marriage, but he was worried, especially seeing Berengera in such distress. The unexpected news had left him unsure of what to do. Feeling the weight of responsibility and the urgency of the situation, he turned to his employer, a man named Mr. Blake, for advice. Mr. Blake was known to be well connected and acquainted with many people. He introduced the young man to Dr. James Smith, a so-called doctor of botanic medicine, who used predominantly herbal remedies for healing purposes. Dr. Smith told William not to worry and reassured him that he could help Berengera for an upfront fee of $10. Now somewhat relieved, knowing that Dr. James Smith could provide Berengera with a natural remedy to induce a miscarriage, he spoke to her and told her that he was confident Dr. Smith would take care of her and ensure that she received proper treatment. Although Berengera still thought that he should marry her, she did acknowledge the stark reality of her situation. As an unmarried young woman in 1849, her pregnancy not only carried significant social stigma, it also presented formidable challenges. She would face society condemnation without family or community supports. This was the harsh reality of what she would endure if the pregnancy continued. So with limited options and a deep sense of apprehension, she reluctantly agreed that terminating the pregnancy would offer the best chance for them both to continue their lives, while she would be able to preserve her own reputation. However, William did not have the $10 needed to secure the services of Dr. Smith. Again, he turned to Mr. Blake, who agreed to lend it to him on the condition that he would work to repay the debt. Before taking Berengera to Dr. Smith's house in Sacco, William asked if a doctor needed to know her real name. Dr. Smith assured him that it wasn't necessary, and instead bestowed upon her the pseudonym of Mary Bean. This simple act seemed to cloak her in a veil of mystery, distancing the young woman from the harsh realities of the situation she found herself in. Towards the end of November 1849, 21-year-old Berengera Caswell, under the alias Mary Bean, went to stay in the house of Dr. Smith, where he agreed that he would administer herbal remedies in an attempt to induce a miscarriage. 4 months later, on the afternoon of the 13th of April 1850, a 14-year-old boy named Osgood Stevens was helping a neighbour clear a clogged brook on the outskirts of Sacco. They came across a plank that had somehow been wedged in a culvert, and they were having great trouble in retrieving it. Eventually they managed to dislodge it, but when they did, they were met with a haunting sight. The lifeless body of a young woman was tied to the whitewashed plank. Overwhelmed by fear, Osgood hurried off to seek assistance, telling anyone that he saw of the grim discovery. As word spread, neighbours arrived to help pull the plank and the body out of the water. They looked in shock as they saw the deceased young woman dressed as if she was going to bed. She was wearing blue stockings and a nightcap, and strangely, a child's apron covered her head. As the apron was lifted, some onlookers recoiled, covering their eyes due to the gruesome sight. The deceased young lady bore the unmistakable sights of decomposition, with a portion of her face eaten away, probably by rats. The authorities were contacted, and when Constable James Wiggin arrived, he moved the body to a nearby barn in an attempt to shield it from the view of the growing crowds. However, despite his best efforts to maintain order and control the situation, the macabre discovery proved irresistible to many. With each passing moment, more people gathered by the barn, seemingly drawn by a morbid curiosity and an insatiable desire to catch a glimpse of the corpse. The coroner, Mr. Thomas Tufts, arrived, accompanied by the local doctor, named Dr. Hall. Both gentlemen then meticulously examined the deceased. While no obvious exterior trauma was evident, they discovered recent signs of pregnancy and determined that her death had resulted from a termination that had gone tragically wrong. But who was this poor deceased young lady? The police asked the onlookers, some of who said that the hair resembled that of a young woman named Mary Bean, and the earrings were also very similar to a pair that she had been seen wearing. Apparently, Mary Bean had been staying in the household of Dr. James Smith for a short period before Christmas, but had then suddenly gone away. One man added that the colour and style of the plank that the poor girl had been bound to resembled the planks that could be found in the stables of the house of Dr. Smith. The police inspected Dr. Smith's residence, paying close attention to the stables. There they noticed that the planks did indeed match the one where the young lady's body was found. Additionally, they observed a missing plank in one of the stable doors. This discovery appeared to be a significant piece of evidence, and one that could potentially connect the deceased woman to Dr. James Smith. While the investigation continued, Mary Bean was buried. The police decided to question the doctor and sent Constable Lane to visit him. Unsurprisingly, Dr. James Smith denied any involvement in the tragic incident, but despite this, Constable Lane proceeded to search his residence, where he found some strange and unsettling items. Within the stove, there were nails, hairpins, metal buttons, and fractured wires. The constable questioned the doctor about these, and without much thought, Dr. Smith just dismissed them as inconsequential remnants. Nevertheless, when questioned, He did admit to knowing Mary Bean and claimed that her death was due to typhoid. In light of the suspicious circumstances, the authorities made the decision to exhume Mary Bean's body for further examination by medical experts. During the subsequent autopsy, her reproductive organs were carefully extracted and preserved for analysis before she was laid to rest once more. The doctors who had performed the autopsy later confirmed that Mary Bean had died due to a massive infection in her abdomen or uterus, a consequence of a termination that had gone tragically wrong. There was no sign that she had ever contracted typhoid fever. A theory emerged suggesting that after the young woman's death, Dr. Smith knew that he had to discreetly dispose of the body to avoid drawing unwanted attention to his dubious medical practices. So he removed a plank from his stable, tied the body to it, and placed it in the nearby brook, expecting it to float into the Saco River and eventually out to sea. However, he was unaware that the body had become lodged in a culvert just a few yards downstream. Dr. James Smith was then arrested. A few days after the body was found, a coroner's inquest was held. By now, the case seemed to have caught the attention of residents throughout Maine. People from different towns and communities were drawn to the unfolding drama, eager to follow its progress. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered, hoping to catch a glimpse of any new developments or updates. Newspapers covered the proceedings extensively, with reporters providing regular updates and analysis. The array of witnesses in the courtroom painted a vivid picture of the events surrounding Berengera's tragic demise. Among them were the doctors who had conducted the autopsy and examined the deceased woman's organs. They offered invaluable clinical insights into the circumstances surrounding her untimely passing. Dr. Hall believed that when Dr. Smith's herbal remedies failed to induce a miscarriage, he resorted to a more aggressive approach, utilising the instruments that the police had later discovered amidst the remnants of a fire. The doctor had attempted to terminate the pregnancy. However, tragically, during this procedure, he inadvertently punctured the young lady's uterus, which led to a severe infection but spread throughout her body, ultimately resulting in her demise. In addition to medical professionals, Mr. William Long, the individual implicated in the young woman's pregnancy, took the stand. He recounted his many visits to Dr. Smith's residence. He said that the doctor had told him that Berengera had died as a result of contracting typhoid. Mr. Long went on to say that he asked Dr. Smith about the funeral, but the doctor told him not to worry, as he had already made arrangements for that. Mr. Long added that he never returned to Dr. Smith's house, but he saw the doctor again in January, when during a brief conversation, he told him that Mary Bean had not died of typhoid. She had in fact died in childbirth. However, it was the testimony of a 12-year-old girl named Anne Covey that cast the most profound shadow over the proceedings. Employed in Dr. Smith's household at the time of Berengera's death, she bravely recounted her observations to the court. She said that a lady known to her as Mary Bean had been residing in Dr. Smith's house for a few weeks, and she had been told that the lady was not well. She remembered that Mary would lie down all the time and was very quiet. Anne added that a gentleman came to visit on most days, and when asked if she could identify the gentleman, Anne pointed to Mr. William Long. She went on to say that Dr. Smith told her that Mary Bean had died on the 22nd of December and that the body was laid out in the parlour. She said that when Dr. Smith told her, she went to look at Mary, as she always thought her to be a kind lady. Anne added that the next day she went with her sisters for Christmas, and upon returning to Dr. Smith's house, there was never any more talk of Mary Bean. She said that this silence persisted until April, when Mary's body was discovered, and Dr. Smith approached her and instructed her to keep silent about Mary's previous presence in the household. When asked how she responded, Anne said that she assured the doctor that she would say nothing of it. As her time in the witness box drew to a close, Anne was questioned about Mary Bean's 2 trunks. She confirmed that she was aware of them and revealed that after the discovery of the body, Dr. Smith had burnt one of them. Although Anne's testimony had echoed softly through the courtroom, its impact was resounding. A witness named Sarah Means told the court that Miss Caswell had stayed with her before going to the residence of Dr. Smith. She said that following this, she had occasionally bumped into her in the streets, but when she had not seen her for a few weeks, She asked the doctor where she might be. She said that the doctor told her that the young lady had gone east to look after a sick relative. When the coroner's inquest concluded, the jury found that Dr. James Smith was guilty of murder, and it was decided that he would be held in Alfred Jail until his trial, which was scheduled to start 5 months later, on the 3rd Tuesday of September 1850. The trial was delayed, and it eventually began in January 1851. Dr. James Smith was defended by a renowned lawyer named Nathan Clifford, a gentleman who had previously served as US Attorney General and later ascended to the US Supreme Court. The trial mirrored the earlier coroner's inquest, and the same witnesses reiterated their testimonies. Somewhat strangely, Mr. Clifford sought to deflect blame for the crime from his client, and instead put it upon Mr. William Long, suggesting to the court that the young man's involvement in Miss Berengera Caswell's most unfortunate predicament had led him to do away with her. This claim was soon dismissed, as Mr. Clifford could not provide any proof to support it. After the witnesses had provided their testimonies, and all of the evidence had been heard, the jury was sent out to deliberate. They did so for just 3 hours, before returning to find the defendant, Dr. James Smith, guilty of second-degree murder. The judge then sentenced him to life in prison. However, Dr. Smith did not spend the rest of his life in prison. In March 1851, precisely 2 months after the trial, his legal representative, Mr. Nathan Clifford, lodged an appeal at the Maine Supreme Court. The appeal was exhaustive, presenting 22 points of contention, which were designed to challenge the conviction. Central to this argument was the contention that Dr. Smith's culpability should have been categorised as manslaughter rather than murder. Over the next year, the Maine Supreme Court deliberated these arguments, carefully considering each point raised. Additionally, they scrutinised Miss Caswell's behaviour, questioning the abundance of her clothing and her choice of earrings, viewing them as reflections of her morals. In that era, it was unusual for respectable women to adorn themselves with such extravagant accessories. By wearing them, the court seemed to believe that Miss Caswell was attempting to deny social norms and suggested that she may have contributed to her own unfortunate situation. The prevailing belief was that girls who worked in factories did so to financially support their families. However, the court thought that Miss Caswell had instead embraced her newfound financial independence. It was as if the legal authorities overseeing the appeal wanted her story to become a cautionary tale for other young girls, a warning against engaging in intimate relationships before marriage. In the eyes of the judges, Miss Caswell's actions served as a stark reminder of the consequences of straying from the expected path of virtue and modesty. In April 1852, they reached their verdict. Dr. James Smith's conviction for murder was deemed untenable. Consequently, his conviction was overturned, leading to his release. Having already served more than enough time in prison for a manslaughter charge, he was granted his freedom. He returned to Saco, where he was reunited with his wife, but it was hard for him to shake off the fact that he had done something so wrong, and his reputation remained tarnished. However, he did not live very long. It is believed that he had contracted tuberculosis while in prison, and although he battled the illness for 3 years, he died in 1855, leaving behind a legacy clouded by controversy and the consequences of his actions. Miss Berengera Caswell's family expressed their wish to have the body returned to Canada, so her sister Thais embarked on a mission to fulfill this request. When she arrived in Saco, she discovered that the generous people had pooled funds to cover the expenses of transporting the body back to Brompton. The coffin was then put on a train going to Quebec via New Hampshire. However, contrary to expectations, Berengera Caswell's body never reached Canada. It is speculated that instead, Thais made arrangements for her sister to be laid to rest in a cemetery in Manchester, near the mill where she had once worked. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next brief case.